we have some other breaking deep state news that we're going to get into in the course of the program today. Bruce Ohr has been testifying for a good part of the day, and I'm getting a lot of interesting feedback from my sources that are in the know. And what we're hearing is that not only is Bruce Ohr contradicting everything that others like Lisa Page had to say and Peter Strzok had to say, so you got a lot of covering up here, but apparently does not have particularly good answers as it relates to the pressing questions about what's going on here. Now, one thing that we did learn from the Associated Press, within weeks of launching the FBI's initial Russiagate investigation, Peter Strzok, then the FBI counterintelligence chief, began meeting with Bruce Ohr. Remember, Bruce Ohr was demoted so far 2 times. Why he has a job is beyond any understanding I have. And at the time, Ohr was trying to pass bogus anti-Trump research compiled by Christopher Steele to the FBI. Now, Strzok testified in July that he met with Ohr at least 5 times during late 2016 and early 2017. Now, shortly after Robert Mueller was appointed the special counsel in May of 2017, well, he tapped Strzok to be his lead Russiagate investigator. Strzok's decision to join Mueller's team came weeks after his meetings with Bruce Ohr ceased. But Strzok certainly had the opportunity to share the bogus intelligence that Ohr got from Steele with the rest of Mueller's team. Now, when you go back and you look at these text messages and handwritten notes between Christopher Steele and Bruce Ohr, 70 contacts, email, text messages, and actual meetings between the two, and a lot of questions about what Nellie Ohr was doing when she was working for Fusion GPS. But some of the things that we do know is that Christopher Steele was deathly afraid of being investigated by Charles Grassley's committee. We know that 2 days before James Comey was about to testify, that Christopher Steele was panicked and was writing his buddy Bruce Ohr. Remember, they met before and just after and then into the Trump presidency, long after Christopher Steele had been fired, that they talked a lot about getting Christopher Steele phony information in the hands of special counsel Robert Mueller. 2 days before Comey's testifying, we know that he was worried and concerned that whether or not the firewalls were going to hold, and also scared to death that he was going to be exposed. That means, you see, it's all beginning to come together. It's like a big jigsaw puzzle. And there's a lot of news. We got into a lot of this last night with Sarah Carter as it relates to Stefan Halper. And this guy and all the contacts, it's interesting. He was in contact with George Papadopoulos, and he had all the Russian connections. He did. And he's asking all the questions, and Michael Flynn and Carter Page. I mean, that seems, you know what, just doesn't seem exactly right. Anyway, we have the 4th highest ranking official in the Justice Department. You know, it's amazing how the media, even in the Lanny Davis case, I love CNN, and I'll give you more details in the next half hour, but here Lanny Davis admits that he is the author of a false report as it relates to Michael Cohen's knowledge of that Donald Trump knew about the Trump Tower meeting, the infamous meeting. Then he says, never mind. That is not true. I can't confirm that. And then CNN just stands by the story. I mean, you want to know why people chant fake news? That's one of the reasons. But also ignoring stories like, Bruce Ohr and Strzok and Page and McCabe and Comey and everybody else, and exonerating Hillary, letting her go, the crime she had committed. Now we're hearing, and we have a report we'll get to later in the program today, how the Chinese actually hacked into Hillary's server. They got them all. And a report that Anthony Weiner's laptop, well, they didn't examine 99.5% of the emails on that laptop. And we read yesterday there's some 700,000 of them. They only went through a small number of them. But you got the 4th highest ranking official in the Justice Department, Bruce Ohr, and his close relationship with the former spy and dirty dossier author. He doesn't even stand by his own dossier, Christopher Steele, that Hillary paid for, without the permission and knowledge of his boss, Rod Rosenstein. And Ohr and Steele have this close relationship before and after the election and during the election. And then the emails that we've been able to unearth, the text messages, the handwritten notes, showing how they work together to spread this propaganda, disinformation to the American people, stuff that they never verified on their own at all, ever, all for the purpose of winning an election and swaying the American people in the lead up to an election. It's pretty unbelievable. It's called lying. That's propaganda. It's what we'd expect. Speaking of Russian, we'd expect from the former Soviet Union. I'll explain when we get back. 800-941-SEAN is our number. We'll continue. I'm getting all my inside sources telling me today was a very, very productive day as it relates to the two committees behind closed doors, grilling who was once the fourth highest ranking official in the U.S. Department of Justice. And that, of course, is the Associate Deputy Attorney General Bruce Ohr. And Bruce Ohr's cultivated relationship with foreign spy, dirty dossier author Christopher Steele. Remember, Christopher Steele never stood by his own dossier. When he was questioned under oath in an interrogatory about his own dirty dossier with Russian lies that Hillary Clinton and the DNC funneled money through a law firm, Perkins Coie, that then hired Fusion GPS and Op Research Group. Bruce Ohr's wife worked for that group, and he didn't report that and identify that as was mandated by the DOJ, separate issue. And then, of course, they hired Christopher Steele. And this is where all these ridiculous lies about Michael Cohen being in Prague. He'd never been in Prague. And hookers in a Ritz-Carlton in Moscow urinating in Donald Trump's bed. And so on and so forth. Most of it debunked. But he went on literally was out there, and his contact was the fourth highest ranking guy in the Department of Justice, Bruce Ohr. Talking to Steele all the time, before, during, and after the 2016 election. We had unearthed a lot of the text messages between the two, the emails between the two. We have handwritten notes between the two, detailing how Bruce Ohr and Christopher Steele were working together to spread the dirty dossier information throughout every level of government, but more importantly, using that false, unverified Russian lies that Hillary paid for to propagandize and use as a disinformation campaign and a lying campaign to the American people. And then the contact even continued after the FBI cut all ties with Christopher Steele. The FBI was paying Christopher Steele at one point. Christopher Steele was fired for lying and leaking to the press. And in spite of being fired, it's still the information that he put together that was never verified or corroborated still become the basis of a FISA warrant application. The same people involved in this are the same people involved that gave Hillary the exoneration without even doing an investigation. No American would get away with what Hillary Clinton got away with in terms of top secret classified information in a mom and pop shop bathroom closet of Platte Rivers Network server company. And there's a report in the Daily Caller. We'll have more information on that later in the program today. That, in fact, the Chinese are one of the countries that literally hacked into Hillary's server. I've always said it's probably the Russians, yeah. But it's also probably the Chinese, the North Koreans, and the Iranians. And we have a horrible job our government is doing protecting our secrets. That's why this is so serious. Because why? Because methods and sources and people, you know what? It puts their lives at risk. Anyway, they continue to stay in contact with each other. Bruce Ohr knew that the dossier was bought and paid for by the Clinton campaign. Just like everybody that signed off on the FISA warrant, they all knew it. None of them bothered to do their own verification as the law requires, as FBI protocol requires. You know, you got people like Comey and Sally Yates, and the last renewal application, the fourth application in toto, was signed by Rod Rosenstein. You know, and everybody knew that Steele was doing Clinton's bidding, as was op research firm Fusion GPS. They didn't care. And they also likely knew that the contents were unverified at best. But they didn't care. It was just one big Clinton bought and paid for lying machine with the highest levels of government helping and assisting her in her effort to lie to the American people in her search for power. It's like they did to Bernie Sanders in the primary. Why stop now? Bruce Ohr's wife, Nellie, worked with Christopher Steele of Fusion GPS. I think that's a massive detail that Bruce Ohr failed to report to the DOJ. And then you have some of his colleagues use the contents of the dirty dossier as the basis for the entire criminal investigation and FISA court warrant requests. So the Ohr-Steele relationship was so seedy that in 2017, Steele expressed his concern. Jim Comey was about 2 days away from testifying in Congress. And Christopher Steele wrote to Bruce Ohr, hey, just wondering if you had any news. Obviously, I would assume Fusion GPS and we are a bit apprehensive given the scheduled appearance at Congress on Monday, hoping that important firewalls will hold. Many thanks. Okay, what are the firewalls? That would be the lies that they built together, that everybody's in on. And according to Bruce Ohr's handwritten memo, Steele was, quote, very concerned about the Comey hearing and very afraid that they will be exposed. Well, you're not fearing exposure unless you did something horribly wrong. And other communications show Steele's efforts to reach the special counsel. Yeah, Robert Mueller, using Bruce Ohr as a conduit. And in November 2017, Ohr writes to Steele, well, I passed on the questions, well, apparently to the special counsel, but I haven't gotten an answer yet. So Ohr is literally feeding Christopher Steele's lies, Russian lies, to Bob Mueller. He fed it to the American people. He fed it to Fusion GPS. They're feeding it to everybody. Now they're feeding their lies to Robert Mueller as the witch hunt continues. Unbelievable. And his, Democratic donor band of witch hunters. And Steele later wrote back, well, I'm presuming you've heard nothing back from your special counsel colleagues on the issues you have kindly put forward from me. To say this is a disappointment is an understatement. I thought foreign nationals weren't supposed to impact our elections. We deserve answers today, and I'm hearing we're getting some. This closed door session taking place before the House Judiciary and Oversight Committee. It's important we get answers to everything. When did Steele, what did he mean when he said important firewalls will hold, hoping that they hold? What are those firewalls? Why was Steele so worried about, his words, being exposed? Who in the DOJ knew that Steele was feeding information to Ohr? Who knew that he was feeding information to Robert Mueller? Why didn't anybody ever step up and say, maybe we need to verify this, considering so many high-ranking DOJ, FBI officials have signed off on his dossier that he himself discounted when he was threatened with perjury in an interrogatory in Great Britain. So who in the DOJ knew that Steele was feeding information to Ohr? And was Ohr working on the Russia probe without Rod Rosenstein's permission or knowledge? Who in the special counsel investigation did Ohr pass along Steele's issues to? How many contacts were there with the special counsel? And I think this is important. Did any of the FISA applications contain information from Ohr's work with Christopher Steele? And did Ohr ever check out the authenticity, veracity of what Steele was putting out? Did he do any background work on it? Did he ever ask his wife about why was his wife working for Fusion GPS? What was her role there? That's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a Federalist article outlining several topics that got to be addressed. I know this has nothing to do with, years gone by bank loan applications or filed tax returns from years and years ago or taxi medallions. But if you're looking for collusion and not the witch hunt, maybe you want to look into this area. The whole thing is just so sick and ugly and twisted and such an abuse of power. It's unbelievable. Mark Meadows is saying that we've learned new information suggesting the FBI and DOJ leaked to the press. In other words, used articles to then obtain FISA warrants. That's like in the case of Michael Isikoff and Yahoo News. Yeah, they were used to, remember, Christopher Steele fed the information to Michael Isikoff. Christopher Steele, remember the dossier he put together that he doesn't even believe is true. That became the bulk of the application to spy on an opposition party campaign associate in the lead up to the election and post-election. But then they also leaked articles coming from the same source, Christopher Steele, circular sourcing, and they tried to make it seem like, oh, these are separate sources. Mark Meadows said, we've learned new information suggesting our suspicions are true. FBI, DOJ have previously leaked information to the press and used those same press stories as a separate source to justify FISA warrants. Until now, we've known that the Steele dossier leaked information directly to Yahoo News and Mike Isikoff. That became a supporting piece of evidence in the FBI's FISA warrant application and then subsequent renewal applications. So while we've known that Steele fed Isikoff with this information from the dubious dossier, and the FBI used both Steele's dossier and Isikoff's Steele-inspired article to game the FISA system, Mark Meadows now says that the FBI and DOJ directly leaked information to the press, which then they then used for the same type of FISA scheme. Strong evidence discovered in January suggested the former FBI employee, Lisa Page, leaked privileged information to Devlin Barrett, formerly of the Wall Street Journal, now at the Washington Post. Whether any of Barrett's reporting was subsequently used to obtain a FISA warrant is unknown at this time. And Meadows also, his big tweet out on Monday, just coming hours before Bruce Ohr testified from earlier today. But anyway, what you have here is Ohr's role as a conduit between Steele and the FBI continued for months, resulted in 12 separate FBI interviews, including several after Trump's inauguration. This thing stinks to high heaven. Trey Gowdy vowed that we're going to get to the bottom of what he did, why he did it, and who he did it in concert with, and whether he had the permission of the supervisors of the DOJ. That's why they didn't fire him, because they want people in the room representing him. FBI agent told Congress the Bureau used to leak stories to obtain FISA warrants. Pretty unbelievable. Now we've got this whole issue of what's going on with Lanny Davis. I've known Lanny Davis for years, arguing back in the Clinton impeachment years. Never had anything against Lanny. I just know that there's nothing I can ever say that's ever going to convince him that, in fact, the Clintons aren't the people that I think he believes they are. But anyway, putting that aside, so Lanny Davis became the attorney for Michael Cohen, and he's telling BuzzFeed and other places that he was the source for CNN's article last month claiming that Cohen would tell Robert Mueller that President Trump knew about the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting. Remember, with the Russian woman, the Russian attorney. Remember, Fusion GPS met with that attorney both before and after the Trump Tower meeting. And it all turned into the Magnitsky Act. It was about Russian adoption. Anyway, since CNN's article published, Davis has now admitted that to the Washington Post and CNN that he actually has no such knowledge of Cohen knowing any such thing. And he also regretted lying about it on CNN last week. And then he told Anderson Cooper, I think the reporting of the story got mixed up in the course of the criminal investigation, but denied being the source for the original story. That turned out to be a lie. And he said, I made a mistake. I didn't mean to be cute, he said, but I made a mistake. And the original report by, Carl Bernstein, hardcore leftist that he is, and Marshall Cohen claimed that Michael Cohen had personally witnessed Donald Trump Jr. informing Trump of the meeting. Trump denied the report at the time. Now Davis is backtracking. This is where all the impeachment talk came last week. Is anyone going to go on TV tonight and say, yeah, we screwed up? No, just the opposite. CNN is actually standing by their fake story. Even though the source that they had, that they know, they're still standing by it. You just can't make this stuff up, but it's true. Anyway, we got Hillary Clinton's emails hacked by China. As I said, we're going to get to that later. Now, one other thing that we've begun to put together, first, Lindsey Graham, I don't have much time here. He said this morning that he's seen plenty of evidence of corruption at the DOJ and FBI. I've seen no evidence of collusion after 2 years. Mueller's been looking at it. We'll see what he says. but I've seen plenty of evidence of corruption at the DOJ and the FBI. That should be stunning. Not one Democrat seems to care. Reverse the roles. Imagine if the Republican Party had paid a foreign agent to go to Russia to get dirt on Hillary Clinton, and they used it to get a warrant into her campaign and never told the court who paid for it. Front page story everywhere. That's pretty corrupt. When the U.S. attorney and the DOJ lawyers say it's our job to stop Trump, could you imagine what would happen if they said it's our job to stop Clinton? Pretty good point. It's a pretty good point. All right, the big news of today, Bruce Ohr's testimony and varying accounts. I'm getting a very productive day is what I'm hearing. A lot of information was exposed. A lot of the important questions that we raised last night, apparently there were answers to. Sarah Carter, Fox News investigative reporter and contributor, and Greg Jarrett, Fox News legal analyst. Thank you both for being here. In Ohr's notes from May 10th, 2017, he goes on to write that Steele is concerned about a letter from the Senate Intelligence Committee writing three things. Ask them three questions. What info did you give to the U.S. government? What was the scope of your investigation? Do you have any other info that would assist in our question? Now, SarahACarter.com reported this week text messages between Steele and Ohr revealing that Steele was anxious about Comey's testimony, was hoping the, quote, important firewalls hold because he didn't want to get exposed. Anyway, those text messages came up today in these hearings. Sarah, I know you've been briefed by a number of people and talked to a number of people because you have been hanging outside that briefing room pretty much all day.
Yes, a lot of news coming out of Bruce Ohr's testimony today to Congress, mostly on the back end, of course. This was behind closed doors, Sean, so the public, unfortunately, didn't get a chance to see it for themselves, and neither did we. So we're taking information that's coming out, that's trickling out from the testimony. I tell you, there were a couple of big bombshells today for me. One is that the FBI and others used, this was consistent. They obviously knew that they were using Bruce Ohr as a back channel for Christopher Steele's information even after they fired him. I think the bigger news here, and this is something that people are not really talking about, was when did the FBI actually learn about Nellie Ohr? When did the FBI learn that she was working for Fusion GPS? And when did they learn about the fact that Christopher Steele was biased against, against President Trump, that he would do anything? In his own words, Bruce Ohr's own 302, that was his interview with the FBI, where he said, that he said Christopher Steele basically did not want to see Trump become president, would basically do anything to that. Well, guess what? They knew it before they sought the FISA on Carter Page.
Wow.
That is big news because they did not disclose that to the FISA court judges. And I'm telling you that when that information actually sinks in, this is something that I'm certain the FISA courts will be very angry about, and it's certainly something that plays right into what we've been seeing all along, is that information was withheld from the Foreign Intelligence
Well, they
Surveillance
withheld
Court.
that Hillary Clinton paid for it. They never verified it as is required by law and FBI protocol. And when did they discover his bias? Oh, well, that was before the FISA application. One question I'd like to know is, when he finally gave an interrogatory and wouldn't even stand by his own dossier, and then you have the exchange between Bruce Ohr and Christopher Steele. Again, he's not standing by his dossier. He said it's raw intelligence, maybe 50-50. Then the question is, when did they know that, and were any of the FISA renewals based on that?
Absolutely. They were definitely pushing in that direction. As for that exact specific question, Sean, I don't have an answer to that yet. I'm sure if they did ask the question, we're going to get the answer to it. I can certainly tell you that there was a lot of concern among congressional members that that's exactly what happened, that they did know before they put in the FISA application. I think that's why it was so imperative that they find out, who authorized this. That was one of the questions I was really concerned with.
Did we get any answers to what the firewalls comments holding were about, or afraid I'm going to get exposed?
I actually asked a number of people about that. There's one that has not gotten back to me yet, but the few that I asked, they did not have an answer to that question yet.
In other words, they hadn't asked the question up until that point?
They hadn't asked the question through almost the whole first half of the hearing.
All right, let me bring Greg Jarrett in. Greg, it seems like a massive fraud perpetrated on FISA court judges in these applications, and it's now getting more real every day.
That's right. It was actually in September of 2016 that Steele told Ohr he was, quote, this is a direct quote, desperate that Donald Trump not get elected, passionate about him not being president. So given an extreme bias and motivation to lie, I mean, all contact with Steele should have been terminated. Toss his dossier in the garbage. But Ohr and the FBI were determined to use Steele and his unverified documents to damage Trump. So the question today, and I think Sarah has found out the answer, is when did Ohr pass that information, Steele's quote, onto the FBI? Was it before the first FISA application was filed? I believe it was October 23rd of 2016. And I think the answer that Sarah is getting from people who are in the deposition is that, yes, the FBI knew of that bias.
Do we know if it's going to get released, the transcript at least?
I don't know that yet, Sean. I think that would be fascinating. I think that would be vitally important for the American people. First off, I mean, this was a deposition. It made it easier on Bruce Ohr, I'm guessing, to go and speak to members of Congress. There wasn't what people would call a big media circus with, cameras pointed at him and flashing bulbs in the front of the room. But it's really important for the American people to have clarity on this, to understand what was going on, to put the pieces together. I mean, this affects every single one of us, and it's affected our administration. I mean, look at this. For the last 2 years, this is all our country mostly is talking about, and it led to a special counsel investigation of the Trump campaign, and now we're finding all of this information out, how all of these players operated with one another. I'll tell you one more thing that I was able to find out. One was the question that we all asked, was whether or not anyone above Bruce Ohr knew that he was actually a source for the FBI. And what he testified before Congress was that he did not inform his superiors that he was being used as a source. Now, the FBI knew, and this is even more interesting. Who at the FBI knew that Ohr was being used as a back channel for Christopher Steele? Well, if it was only the agents, you'd say, okay, well, nobody up above knew anything. Now what I'm hearing is that Andrew McCabe was very well aware of what was going on. Lisa Page and Peter Strzok also knew what was going on, and by the way, had met with Bruce Ohr a number of times and communicated with him. So the highest levels of the FBI, that tells me if Andrew McCabe knew what was going on, certainly Director Comey knew what was going on because he was the deputy.
But he was a regular back channel to the FBI without any supervision. And he said all the information was biased, wouldn't be allowed in court for evidence, but yet it was used as a FISA warrant, which speaks poorly of everybody that signed off on that. David Schoen is also with us, civil and criminal defense attorney. What's your take on all of this? Well, we'll have more by the time we get on TV tonight at 9 as it's just breaking up, but what's your take, David?
I'd like to make a point about the FISA court. Remember, the FISA court rules require the government to file a supplemental petition if they have omitted or misstated any fact in any application. Where is that supplemental submission now? I just want to get a little bigger picture. You and Sarah Carter, with her intelligence in this case, have broken what I find to be one of the most bizarre stories in the history of the Justice Department and maybe the country. This is a guy who's a higher up in the Justice Department in Bruce Ohr. You've only now starting to unravel this stuff in the last several weeks, operating what essentially looks like a private security operation on his own agenda, and on not just his own agenda, though, on his agenda, the agenda of Chris Steele and all of these other people working. For the American people, this has to be an absolutely astonishing set of facts. And for people who are suspicious about private actors operating behind the scenes, to undermine the government. If this isn't some evidence of that, if this doesn't give rise to those kinds of conspiracy theories based on facts, I don't know what does. I've never heard of such a thing. And to have his wife working with his GPS fusion, he's not a private actor here. He works in the Justice Department. I'm not interested in his wife feeding him information that's then fed to the FISA court. My God, what kind of process is that?
And I got to ask, it seems that the FBI always hangs on to these guys. He's been demoted twice, Greg Jarrett, because I suspect they want to control what he says. And they want in terms of the process. And they want FBI lawyers involved. And remember, Lisa Page was the lawyer for Andrew McCabe, or one of the chief lawyers for Andrew McCabe.
Sure.
So you notice they didn't fire Peter Strzok until after he testified. Now I guess Bruce Ohr, well, I think now it's a death sentence career-wise for Bruce Ohr.
Well, it should be. He should have been terminated. It was a direct violation of FBI procedures to use a discredited source. To circumvent the rules, the Bureau used Ohr as a conduit to continue its relationship with Steele. Ohr would communicate with Steele, then pass the information to the FBI. And in fact, Peter Strzok, the lead investigator in the case, confirmed in his congressional testimony, you'll recall, and this is a quote, the FBI received documents and material from Mr. Ohr. And, Ohr knew that Steele was a nefarious, untrustworthy character, and Steele was double-dipping, receiving money from the Hillary Clinton campaign and also on the payroll of the FBI from January of 2016 to November of 2016. Ohr was making a profit off of this as well. He's peddling the false Steele document while benefiting from it financially. His wife, Nellie, an employee getting paid by the Clinton campaign.
I want to know what the firewalls were that he was so afraid of.
Well,
Me too, Sean.
I want to know. I want to know what he was fearful of being exposed. His words, not mine. Sarah.
Well, his illicit activities, his illegal activities. You're not allowed to use illegal documents to pursue a criminal investigation, and that's what they were doing. And so he was fretting to Ohr that he might be exposed. And so the firewall was Bruce Ohr and Comey and McCabe. You gotta.
And what about his? Have you gotten my information to your special counsel? That means he was trying to funnel this phony information to Robert Mueller. I want to know how many contacts were made with Robert Mueller's office, either with Ohr or Steele directly, and what information was passed on.
That's right, Sean. And if you talk about firewalls, right, if I'm using the word firewalls, are the firewalls going to hold? That means I put with other people something in place so that I will not be scathed by what is possibly going to come out. And so your question's right on the money. What was the firewall? What were they trying to do? How did they set up these firewalls? Who was the go-betweens? Of course, we know Bruce Ohr was a go-between, but he was asking him directly, and maybe Greg's right. I mean, maybe the fact that, he put Bruce Ohr as the middleman, the back channel to the FBI, maybe Bruce Ohr was one of those firewalls, but he said firewalls, plural. And that makes me wonder, what were they talking about? How did they intend to protect one another, and who all was involved in it? I mean, look, Lisa Page had come out. She had testified behind closed doors, and according to the sources that I spoke with, she was very nonchalant about, Bruce Ohr,
right.
like, oh, I really didn't talk to him. I wasn't really involved with him. She really downplayed any contact with Bruce Ohr.
I gotta put you on hold there. More with David, more with Greg Jarrett, more with Sarah Carter, and Bruce Ohr testifying today before two committees. Bruce will give you final thoughts. I'm sorry, Bruce. David. I'm sorry, Sean. I was thinking of Bruce Ohr.
I'd rather not be associated with
man.
that, but
you know what? Linda's been yelling at me all day about little itsy bitsy mistakes. Now I make another one.
Listen, we do look a little bit alike.
Good grief.
I would say there is little more dangerous.
Why don't you say, hang on, because we're all from, why don't you just say what you want to say instead of sitting back there laughing at me like that? It's so embarrassing. Say what you need to say.
I'm not saying anything. I'm allowing Bruce/David/Sarah/Greg to answer your final question in these final moments.
Good grief.
Everyone looks alike. It happens.
One itsy bitsy mistake. Good grief.
I say nothing. David, what did you want to say about Bruce, your brother?
Yeah. Here's what I say. In recent memory, there is nothing like this we have ever seen in the Department of Justice. I can't think of much that's much more dangerous than having employees of the Department of Justice acting on their own personal agenda, forgetting their allegiance to the rule of law. There's a reason we've never heard of people like Bruce Ohr and others who hold those positions. I might run across them in my field, but there's a reason the general public doesn't know them, because it's an office that runs by the rule of law generally, not based on personalities with like thinkers perverting the law, frankly, for their own agenda, so that we have now the inmates running the asylum. It has to stop.
Sarah, 15, 20 seconds.
I agree with David. Look, it has to stop, but we're still in the middle of an investigation. There's still so much more information out there that we need to get to the public. And once it's all out there, maybe we can clean out these agencies and move forward as a country.
And we're going to have a lot more on this on Hannity tonight. Greg, you got the last word today.
Ironically, Clinton and her campaign not being investigated for violating campaign laws. And here you've got obvious violations by Bruce Ohr, James Comey, Christopher Steele, the whole gang.
Firewalls, what were they? Afraid of being exposed, and what was handed over to Robert Mueller? Hopefully we'll have those answers by 9 o'clock tonight. Ron DeSantis, big primary in Florida. He's next.